The delirious alien princess thrashed in Arthur's battle-hardened arms, her fever-scorched body convulsing as he crushed the glass cure vial into her neck, saving her life, not knowing she would crave his human cock as thanks. "Human, the fate of the galaxy rests on your shoulders," the Galactic Council leader said, his 12 unblinking black pool eyes focused on Arthur. "You must infiltrate the isolationist Idosian palace and cure their dying princess. If she lives, their emperor will be in our debt. We can force them to accept the cure to save the rest of their kind." Arthur scowled as the lizard-skinned mercenary Murloc lumbered over, scales gleaming in the stark light of the space station. The Council had partnered them up for this suicide mission. "I ain't no babysitter," Arthur growled, spitting a mouthful of chew tobacco on the polished silver floor. "500 million galacticreds are on the line. Take it or leave it, Earther," rasped the insectoid council treasurer, rubbing its feelers together greedily. Arthur thought of his mountain of unpaid bounties and back taxes owed to a dozen planetary governments. This was his only shot at freedom, at a normal fucking life without constantly watching over his shoulder for assassins or repo beings. "Fine. But if that scaly fucker gets in my way, you'll be picking shards of his exoskeleton out of your assholes for a week," Arthur rumbled, stomping back to his ship to gear up, dreading this impossible mission that could decide the fate of billions. Arthur's battered ship touched down on the outskirts of Xanath, kicking up clouds of red dust. He and Murloc emerged, dressed in the flowing robes of Idosian merchants, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. They made their way through the bustling streets, the palace looming ahead, a massive structure of gleaming metal and stone. "Place is locked up tighter than a nun's asshole," Murloc growled, eyeing the heavily armed guards and the advanced biometric scanners at every entrance. "We could try the sewers, sneak in from below." Arthur shook his head. "Nah, they'd sniff us out in a heartbeat. I got a better idea." He led Murloc to a seedy bar in the city's underbelly, where they found a pair of Idosian bureaucrats deep in their cups. A few well-placed blows, and the officials were out cold, their identity badges and retinal scan data now in Arthur's possession. The next day, disguised as the officials, they approached the palace gates. The guards eyed them suspiciously, hands on their weapons. "Halt! State your business," one barked. Arthur put on his most officious tone. "I am Zorgax, and this is Krelmar from the Ministry of Health. The princess's condition has worsened. We have been sent by the Emperor himself to administer a new treatment." The guards hesitated, then scanned their stolen badges and retinal data. After a tense moment, the scanner beeped green and the gates grudgingly opened. Inside, they navigated the labyrinthine halls, finally arriving at the princess's quarters. But before they could enter, a fierce-looking Idosian warrior blocked their path. It was Zathax, the princess's personal bodyguard. "Why are you here?" Zathax demanded, his hand on his blade. "I was not informed of any new treatment." Arthur tried to bluff. "There's no time, man. The princess is dying. We have to—" But Zathax saw through the ruse, drawing his weapon with a snarl. Arthur and Murloc leapt into action. A brutal melee ensued, fists and feet flying, blades clashing. Arthur took a nasty gash across his ribs, but managed to land a crushing blow to Zathax's temple, dropping him. They burst into the princess's chamber, finding her prone on the bed, skin ashen, breathing shallow. Arthur pulled out the cure, prepared to inject it, when suddenly the princess lashed out with shocking strength, sending him crashing into the wall. She leapt to her feet, all signs of illness gone. "Fool," she spat. "I was never sick. This was a trap set by the Emperor himself to lure in the Council's lackey, and you fell for it." Arthur struggled to his feet, head ringing, blood dripping from his wound. The mission had gone straight to shit, and now he was face to face with not a dying damsel, but a deadly honey trap. Arthur's eyes fluttered open, as rough hands dragged him and Murloc from the princess's chambers. Head throbbing, blood dripping down his face from the brutal fight with Zathax, he stumbled along the gleaming palace corridors. A dozen Idosian guards surrounded them, plasma rifles trained on their backs. They were brought before the Emperor in his cavernous throne room. He lounged on a floating dais, cruel amusement flickering in his reptilian eyes as he surveyed the battered captives. "Did you really think your pathetic infiltration would succeed?" he hissed. "I've known of the Council's little scheme from the start. I allowed you to bumble your way in here so I could make an example of you. The Council will learn to keep their meddling noses out of Edosian affairs." Arthur spat a glob of blood on the polished floor. "You won't get away with this," he growled. The Emperor laughed, a grating, sibilant sound. "I already have. Guards, take them to the execution chamber. I want their heads on pikes by sundown." As the guards seized them roughly, Princess Vela stepped forward. "Father, wait! Killing them will only make things worse with the Council. There has to be another way." The Emperor glared at his daughter. "You dare question me? I'll deal with these spies as I see fit." But Vela stood her ground. "Think about it, Father. Dead, they're martyrs. Alive, they're bargaining chips. Imprison them instead. We can use them to negotiate with the Council from a position of strength." The Emperor stroked his scaled chin, considering. After a long moment he waved a clawed hand. "Very well, throw them in the dungeon, but if the Council doesn't meet our demands, their blood is on your hands, daughter." In the dank, filthy cell, Arthur groaned as he probed his bruised ribs. Murloc sat slumped against the wall, his reptilian hide covered in oozing cuts. The cell door clanged open, and Zathak stomped in, eyes blazing with rage. "You made me look like a fool in front of the Emperor," he snarled, slamming a meaty fist into Arthur's gut. "I'll teach you to cross me." The beating seemed to last for hours. By the end, Arthur could barely see through his swollen eyes, every breath a stab of agony in his chest. Some time later, the cell door creaked open again. Arthur tensed, expecting more brutality, but instead Princess Vela slipped inside, a finger to her lips. "I don't have much time," she whispered urgently. "Listen, the plague, my illness, it's all a lie. A story concocted by my father to keep the Council and the other races at bay, while we deal with the situation on our terms." Arthur struggled to sit up, wincing. "What situation?" "I can't say more here, but I disagree with my father's isolationist stance. I think we need the Council's help. I can get you out of here, but you have to take me with you." Murloc let out a rasping chuckle. "And why should we trust you? This could be another trap." Viola's eyes flashed with determination. "Because I'm your only shot at getting out of here alive. I know this palace inside out. Without me, you'll never make it past the automated defenses. So, what's it going to be?" Arthur and Murloc exchanged a long look. They didn't have much choice. "All right," Arthur said grimly. "Get us out of here." Viola produced a keycard, unlocking their shackles. They crept out into the deserted corridor, following her lead, but they'd barely made it 100 meters when alarms began to blare. "Shit, they've detected us!" Vela cursed. Heavy blast doors started slamming down, sealing off the exits. From around the corner, the ominous clanking of approaching sentinels echoed, their metal limbs armed with crackling plasma cannons. Arthur and Murloc were still weak and battered from the beating Zathax gave them, and now they were about to face the palace's deadly automated defenses. The odds of escape seemed to shrink with every passing second. Arthur, Vela, and Murloc charged down the gleaming palace corridors, plasma blasts scorching the walls around them. Arthur dove, rolled, and came up firing, his stolen Edosian pistol dropping 2 sentinels in a spray of sparks and shredded metal. Murloc bulled forward, his reptilian bulk absorbing hits as he crushed a sentinel's head with a single blow. Viola moved with shocking speed and grace, dodging plasma bolts and striking with surgical precision. She dropped a sentinel with a kick to its chest housing, then whirled and sliced another's head off with a shimmering blade that seemed to materialize from thin air. "I thought you were just a pretty face," Arthur yelled over the chaos. "I'm full of surprises," Vela grinned fiercely, her blade a blur. But more and more sentinels poured into the corridor, a seemingly endless tide of metal and plasma. "We can't keep this up forever," Murloc growled as a blast seared his shoulder, filling the air with the stench of charred scales. "The main entrance is cut off," Vela said, panting. "We need another way out, the Emperor's private hangar. If we can get to his ship—" They fought their way to the hangar, leaving a trail of broken sentinels behind them. But as they burst through the doors, they skidded to a halt. There, waiting for them with a cruel smile, was Zathax. Behind him stood a dozen of the Emperor's most elite warriors. "Going somewhere?" Zathax smirked, his blade gleaming. Arthur stepped forward, his eyes hard. "I've got unfinished business with you, asshole." They clashed in a brutal dance of fists and feet, blades ringing. Zathax was skilled, but Arthur fought with the desperate strength of a man with nothing left to lose. A hard elbow to the temple sent Zathax reeling. Arthur pressed his advantage, hammering the Adosian with a relentless flurry of blows. Meanwhile, Murloc and Vela took on the other warriors. Murloc fought like a force of nature, his massive fists pulverizing armor and bone alike. Vela was a blur of motion, her blade flashing, each strike precise and deadly. In the end, they stood victorious, but at a heavy cost. All three were battered, bleeding, barely able to stand. Arthur's ribs screamed with each breath. Murloc's scales were cracked and oozing, and Vela favored her left leg heavily. But the Emperor's ship was just ahead. Suddenly the hangar doors exploded inward. The Emperor strode through the smoke, eyes blazing with rage, a small army of guards at his back. "Vela," he roared, "you betray your own kind for these animals?" Vaela stood tall, defiant. "No, father. I betray your short-sighted cruelty. Our people need help, not isolation." The Emperor's face contorted with fury. "Then you will die with them. Guards, kill them all." Plasma bolts filled the air as Arthur and his companions limped and stumbled towards the ship, fighting for every inch. They clambered aboard, slamming the hatch shut just as a barrage of plasma slammed into the hull. Arthur slid into the pilot's seat, his blood slicking the controls. He fired up the engines and punched the thrusters, the craft lurching forward. But the Emperor's men had already reacted, a hail of plasma pounding the ship's shields. The engines coughed, sputtered, died as they cleared the hangar. Warning klaxons blared as they started losing altitude, the ground rushing up to meet them. Arthur fought with the controls, trying to coax some life back into the engines, but it was no use. In the back, Murloc tore at the engine housing, his claws a blur as he desperately tried to hotwire the damaged systems. Vela ripped strips of cloth from her robe, trying to staunch the worst of Arthur's bleeding. The Emperor's fighters screamed in behind them, plasma cannons charging up for the kill shot. Arthur closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But it never came. A shadow fell over them, and suddenly a massive council warship was overhead, its tractor beam locking onto their crippled craft. It dragged them upwards, the Emperor's fighters scattering as the ground receded below. They were safe for now, but badly hurt, and they had a renegade princess with them, one whose very presence could spark a war across the galaxy. Arthur slumped back in his seat, his vision graying at the edges from blood loss and pain. They were alive, but their mission had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. In the sterile medical bay of the council warship, Arthur gritted his teeth as the robotic surgeon stitched his wounds, the anesthetic barely dulling the pain. On the beds beside him, Murloc and Vela were undergoing similar treatments, their bodies battered and bruised from the fight in the Emperor's hangar. As the surgeon finished its work, the door hissed open, and a group of council representatives strode in, their expressions a mix of relief and admiration. "Arthur Murloc Vela," the lead representative said, his voice resonating with authority, "your bravery and sacrifice have not gone unnoticed. Thanks to your actions, the truth about the Adosian situation has been revealed to the galaxy." He tapped a control panel, bringing up a holographic display of Eidos Prime. Across the planet's surface, vast crowds of Idosians were marching, waving banners and chanting slogans. The Emperor's deception has been exposed, and his own people have risen up against him. He has been deposed, and the Idosians are now ready to accept aid from the Council to combat the plague. Arthur sat up, wincing as his stitches pulled. What about Zathax and the Emperor's Guard? "Arrested and awaiting trial," another representative said. "They will answer for their crimes." As the representatives continued to brief them on the situation, Arthur felt a growing unease. Yes, they had succeeded in their mission, but at what cost? The violence, the lives he had taken, it all weighed heavily on him. Later, as he stood by the observation window staring out at the stars, he heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Vela. "Arthur," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm, I just wanted to thank you for everything. You risked so much to help my people, to help me." Arthur turned to face her, seeing the emotion in her eyes. "Vela, he began, but she cut him off. "Please let me say this. During our time together, through all the danger and the fighting, I've come to care for you, deeply. I think I'm falling in love with you, Arthur." Arthur closed his eyes, his heart heavy. "Vela, I care about you too, more than you know, but I'm not the man you think I am. The things I've done, the lives I've taken, I'm too damaged. You deserve better." Tears glistened in Vela's eyes, but she nodded. "I understand," she whispered, "but I want you to know that I'll always—" Suddenly an urgent alarm blared through the ship. Arthur and Vela rushed to the bridge, where the council representatives were gathered around a comm screen, their faces grave. "The situation on Eidos Prime has taken a turn for the worse," one of them said. "The plague, it's mutated. It's spreading faster than ever, and if we don't act now, it could wipe out the entire Eidosian race." "We're preparing a massive relief effort," another representative said. "Medical supplies, food, shelter, everything they need. But we need someone to lead the efforts on the ground, someone the Eidosians trust." They all turned to look at Arthur. He shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I'm done with fighting, with killing. I can't do it anymore." "I'll go," Murloc said, stepping forward. "These people need help, and I want to be the one to give it to them." Arthur looked at his friend, seeing the determination in his eyes. He realized that this was Murloc's chance to find a new purpose, a way to make amends for his own violent past. As Murloc prepared to depart, Arthur pulled him aside. "You're a good man, Murloc," he said, gripping the reptilian's shoulder. "The best partner I could have asked for. Take care of yourself down there." Murloc nodded, his eyes glistening. "You too, Arthur. Find that peace you're looking for." Ivoela also made her decision. "I'm going back to Eidos Prime," she said. "My people need me now more than ever." She and Arthur shared a long look, a bittersweet farewell passing between them. They both knew that their paths might never cross again. In the end, Arthur stood alone on the observation deck, watching as the council warship departed Zephyrus 6. Murloc and Vela had taken a shuttle down to the planet's surface, where the hard work of rebuilding and healing was just beginning. Arthur knew he had made the right choice, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a part of himself behind. As the stars stretched into the familiar lines of hyperspace, he closed his eyes, wondering what the future held for him, and whether he would ever find the peace he sought. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.